Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I think the fact that there's enough of you here that maybe we've struck a nerve. How many of you are on or have served on vestries? All righty. So you might know what this is about. The title I wanted to give this workshop, by the way, on Allisyn Thomas, from Canon to the Ordinary, in the bishop's office. The ordinary, for those of you who don't know, is the bishop. It's just another term for the bishop. So when somebody says she or she is canon to the ordinary and canon to the bishop, my tasks are to do what he tells me. So this is part of what I get to do, which I love to do. What I originally wanted to entitle this workshop, and he suggested against it, that is the bishop, is how to serve on vestry without losing your soul. He thought that was a little negative. So before we start, I want to begin with a prayer. This is from the New Zealand Book of Common Prayer, and it's called A Prayer Before a Meeting. So for those of you who have copies or seen the New Zealand Book of Common Prayer, you can find it in there. It's a beautiful resource. So the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
So let us pray. God, our Creator, when you speak, there is light and life. When you act, there is justice and love. Grant that your love may be present in our meeting, so that what we say and what we do may be filled with your Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
By the way, because I can always use some help, I've got this additional brain. If you want some additional brains, they are at one of the ministry tables. It's the one for the Diocese and for the School for Ministry. And so I figure I need it all I can help. But it's also really good because you can use it for tension. I've passed out handouts. I think I've got enough for everybody. So great. So you can take those with you. I'm not really going to be talking about them. We don't have a whole lot of time to cover this topic. This is something that I've done with some vestries and in some workshops for a full day. It can probably go longer. So we've got about an hour, a little over an hour. I invite you at lunch, or if you at some point want to talk any further about this, please get in touch with me. This is something I feel passionately about. So let me talk about what we are going to do during this period of time. I'm going to talk very, very briefly about what the responsibilities of a vestry are. And if you want to know more about what the responsibilities of the vestries are, go into the sanctuary and you're going to have Vestry 101 with Bishop Malthus, because he really is laying out the fullness of what vestries are here for. But I'm just going to touch on these things briefly because I think this is part of the problem when people serve on vestries and they find it to not be, let alone a spiritual experience, to be a negative experience because they're not really clear why they're there and what a vestry is supposed to do. And so you automatically have this disconnect. So I'm going to talk very briefly about that. I'm going to talk about, after that, the vestry as a spiritual body, beginning with discernment to be on a vestry. I think especially for some of our smaller churches, the criteria to be on a vestry is your breathing. And I get it. I really do. You know, I obviously I may lie to it, but really not everybody's meant to serve in a vestry. And it's better to say no than to just feel compelled to do it. Talk about some ways we can nurture vestry responsibility. I'm going to talk about some behaviors and some behavioral norms that I think tend to get in the way of having the vestry, service on the vestry, be a spiritual experience. And to the extent we have time, I'm going to talk about, I think, the most important behavior, and spiritual practice we can engage in, not just on vestries, but gosh, as human beings, and that isn't listening. And I know some of you have heard my workshop on listening. That is a whole separate workshop that I do. But I think one of the biggest problems that we have on vestries and why they end up being such a bad experience is that we don't listen to ourselves. We're not listening to God, and we're not listening to each other. And I really think at the forefront, that may be the biggest problem we have. So, I'm just going to be doing I feel like a drive-through on this topic. Would a couple of you be willing to just say, why are you here? What are you looking for?
I'm actually here to find out how to make being on our vestry a more spiritual experience. Because it's all business mostly.
I second that motion.
Right.
Because we're a small church.
You're a small
We're at
church.
St. Mary's in Rhode. So, yeah, I think everybody's been on the vestry a couple times.
And that will always be the tension because the vestry is responsible for business, and so how do you work that out?
Exactly.
Yeah. Others? Yes.
We're in a position right now at All Saints in Vista. We've just become a mission action parish. There is a MAP team helping us. We've just begun our journey, actually. And so we too feel that it is necessary to keep that vision of spirituality in front of us and not always be sidelined by this needs to be done. We need to put our building blocks together and build a foundation and get it going, get it back up again. And I believe that from time to time we lose sight because of the imposition of some of this information. We lose sight of worship and spirituality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so let me start off with a quote from the Reverend Dr. David Luce on leadership. Interesting enough for Leadership Academy, but obviously as vestry members, you are leaders in the parish and you're seen as leaders of the parish. And he says that leadership is using the gifts God has given you to bring out the gifts of others in order to accomplish great things in and for the world God loves so much. Once again, using the gifts God has given you to bring out the gifts of others in order to accomplish great things in and for the world God loves so much. And if anybody wants that quote, give me your email and I'd be happy to send it. I am notoriously low tech. I apologize. I don't have this on the slide, but my mind is not that way.
If you want, I can make more copies of whatever you want.
Oh, it's not. It's not. Okay. It's just on my own notes, but thank you. Thank you so much. So, the canonical requirements, or the canonical responsibilities of the vestry. Vestry shall be agents and legal representatives of the parish in all matters concerning its corporate property and the relations of the parish to its clergy. You're in the business.
Could you say that again, please?
Thank you.
Canon 14, Section 2, vestry shall be agents and legal representatives of the parish in all matters concerning its corporate property and the relations of the parish to its clergy. That is the most basic, fundamental canon concerning the responsibilities of the vestry. So practically, what does this amount to? The vestry, Bishop's Committee, you know, we've got your chapter, depending on what entity we're talking about, has authority over the fiscal affairs of the parish, maintenance of buildings and grounds, you approve of annual budget, you make sure there's appropriate procedures for audits. I have no financial knowledge, so this is annual assessment, that the annual assessment to the diocese is paid, and that stewardship occurs yearly. Yes?
That all goes to the first part. But what about the relationship with the rector?
I'm just about to get
Okay.
in relationship with the parish to its rectors, the vestry is to work in collaboration with the rector, vicar, dean, you know what I'm saying. That you share mutual concern for life of the parish and congregation. The vestry ensures that there's adequate resources to compensate the rector. Responsible for calling a new rector when the current one leaves. Providing for supply clergy if the rector is either is left or is unavailable, say going on a vacation every once in a while. We really go on vacation. To work with the rector to discern, articulate, and carry out the mission of the parish. With the rector to support the ministries of the parish. To establish a regular review of ministry to evaluate and refine the work of the parish. To play a liaison role between parish members and clergy and staff, support good communications, and to be spiritual models. So, those are, once again, I can't spend a lot of time on the official responsibilities, but those are what they are in a nutshell. So, the vestry as a spiritual body, I've got, did everybody get the handouts?
No, they're right here.
There's some extras over there, so afterwards.
I have some here, so I'm just gonna pass them around.
Why don't you, we can deal with that later. Can you get it after the workshop? You know, we'll make sure extra copies are made if we don't have them. So, as we've talked about, some find that serving on the vestry can actually enhance their spiritual skills. I know people that feel called to be on the vestry and they love it. They love it. You know, one of the spiritual gifts and one of the things I think was passed out is we're trying to build up our volunteer database and to start thinking about your own spiritual gifts. Administration is a spiritual gift. Some people really feel fulfilled by being in management, organization, and all those things, and doing budgets. Once again, that's not my thing, but I know people that it is, and they just love that they can apply that to the church. I've also seen in more than one case where people have served on the vestry or been elected to a vestry, or I was with the cathedral for 12 years on the chapter. They ended up leaving the church. Because being responsible for, say, certain management decisions, certain budget decisions, when you've got X number of money in your budget and you want it to be used for this versus this, and the discussions that can happen can kill your soul. Now, once again, it's not good or bad, it's just to be cognizant that this happens. So that's why this topic, I think, is so important. For instance, those of you, if this is the case, that are passionately, just committed to doing hands-on outreach work. You love working with the homeless, you love working with children, you love any number of things. You love being acolytes. Being on the vestry may be the worst thing you can do. Just nothing wrong with that. Just own it. And I think what happens, or what doesn't happen, and this is what I'd say is the first step to looking at the spirituality of being on a vestry, is to really have a conscious and a mindful process for discernment as to who should be on vestry. Who is called on vestry? And I don't know of a church that does this. I've read about them. I'm not aware of a church that does this. Even in a larger church such as the cathedral, I mean, there was a nomination committee, and they looked for people who might be willing to or be interested in serving on the vestry, and they would interview people, and they'd talk about to these individuals what might be involved in that case in being on the chapter. But one of the models that I've read about, and I think is such a good idea, is about 6 months, say, before your annual meeting when you elect your vestry members, you might consider having a workshop, a discernment workshop on what's involved in being on the vestry. That you might have some, well, not might, you would have some vestry or some bishop committee members on that group, the rector, the vicar, priest in charge, dean, who's ever there, and to really allow people a chance to say, this is what's involved in being on the vestry. We're going to be doing budgets. We're going to be doing, some, personnel work. We're going to be doing the business of church. And really let people know up front what's involved. Because don't you think, the first time I served on a vestry, I was elected to the chapter before I was ordained, obviously, at the cathedral, and I had a vague idea of what was involved in being on a vestry, but I really didn't know it. And I think I would have done it anyway, because I just think I would have done it anyway at that point. I felt called to do it, but I think that is one of the great flaws in our system, is we really are looking for the right bodies. Or good people. We want good people. So-and-so is so involved in our homeless ministry. I bet she would be great on vestry. Maybe. Maybe not. But they really need to know what's involved in being on vestry.
Allisyn, are you going to talk a little bit about the nominating committee or whoever's deciding how you might determine what the skills required for the vestry for the next year or 3 years might be? In terms of identifying those?
I can try and hit on it. I just don't think I've got enough time to do what you're suggesting, and I think that's a really good idea. But all I want to say at this point is that as you're looking at your vestry elections, is to rather than, and I think most of us do it because, God, there's so much going on, is that we wait too late to start looking at who should be on vestry. And if you really start thinking about doing it 6 months or so beforehand, you're going to give yourself some time to have those conversations, to have some workshops, to allow people to think about the criteria, and then for those people who are not vestry, or also just for the congregation to say, who is it we're electing? How often do you have a workshop on the congregational level, say a forum or something, and say, this is the role of the vestry. So when people vote for them at the annual meeting, they know what they're voting for. And people are doing the best they can, and we're all scrambling, and we've got so much to do. So I just want to say, if you factor in having some sort of conscious discernment process, you're going to help a lot. So it could be workshops, it could be teas, it could be any number of ways that you can structure that.
For this sort of a workshop, you would need presenters or materials. Does the diocese have those sort of things available to us?
Well, yeah, for instance, any of the handouts I just gave you, and this is on spirituality vestry. Yes, we do, and if you go onto the Episcopal Church Foundation Vital Practices website, there is just a plethora of fantastic resources of I was looking at something very specific for this workshop, but also roles and responsibilities of vestries, serving on vestries. It's a gold mine. So I really recommend that you go there. And you can sign up, to get regular emails.
A lot of our churches are so small that we don't have, to have a workshop to see who's going to serve on the vestry is a little bit.
Your turn.
Yeah, why? No, I'm not going to do that. So to me, it looks like it should be the other way around. When someone has a opportunity or desire or is asked, why don't you serve on the vestry? That person feels kind of like, wow, really? And then that person should be directed to those resources. The person being considered so that they can almost self-select so they'll know what they're getting into, because there's just not a whole lot of people to pick from. I don't even, in my short time, know of anybody who was elected or suggested or is on the ballot that was never not elected. That's my experience, because if someone wants this job,
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
well, we would like to have them, they have a heart for it and they want to do it.
I'm gonna, there's lots of different ways to do this.
Right,
I'm not
right.
saying there's one
Right.
size fits all. What I would say for the smaller parishes is have a parish meeting and say, this is the vestry.
Yeah.
But this is the other thing, people. Say no if you don't feel called.
Of course.
Well, no, I think a lot of times people feel, oh, they want me to be on the vestry.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to be in it, because I've seen this in a lot of vestry workshops that I've done, that people don't feel empowered to say no. And sometimes it's better to have one less vestry person than a person who really shouldn't be on.
Absolutely.
I was thinking that for myself as a new vestry member, a lot of times people perceive the vestry as being a certain type of individual, which I never thought I would be, because I don't have any experience in the corporate world, you know. And I guess that's part of it, is making sure that the congregation knows that the vestry is not a type of individual, that it's, you know, it can be any, we need fair representation from all different
Yes,
types.
absolutely, absolutely. And some people are sort of surprised, they don't think they'd like it and they end up liking it, you know, it can work the other way around as well. Yeah.
You gave us the link to the vital practices of the vestry as a church foundation.
The Episcopal Church Foundation.
Okay, that's separate from diocesan things.
Yes, yes.
So I just thought,
It is separate,
Like
but
that.
frankly, that's where we would get our resources from the best. Why reinvent the wheel if we don't need to?
They send out monthly.
Yes, that's what I said, you can sign up for a monthly email.
Just a quick question, how many people must be functioning? Is there a rule on it?
It's in your bylaws, it's in your corporate bylaws, it can change depending on the church.
If we have written a certain number into our corporate bylaws, we must continue to raise that many people.
Or change the bylaws.
Change the bylaws. But sometimes you can have a spot that's open and that maybe the vestry will appoint someone, you know, if someone hasn't elected, so you can get your full complement. I don't have time to talk about the mechanics of how this works. All I'm saying, and I would be happy to talk to you about it afterwards, I just can't today. So let's sort of whiz by now to the spirituality or the ministry of the vestry. One thing I think people sometimes don't think that being on vestry really is a ministry. It is. It's an honor. You know, we're sort of saying, I believe it, but really it's a ministry. And those who tend to be drawn to it, like administration, they feel called to oversight, vision and discernment. They like planning, strategic planning. It's a model of Christian community done well. People watch what's going on in vestry. They're watching it. And appreciation for different kinds of gifts. In the handouts that I've got here, these are the qualities that you may be looking for in vestry members. And we don't tend to think about this. We tend to think, well, we need a lawyer, we need an accountant, maybe a real estate person, all good. But you want your vestry members, one, to be faithful in prayer. You want them to be regular attenders at worship. To be known and hopefully respected in the congregation. To have helpful skills. They tend to be positive people. And to be emotionally healthy. That's never been an issue with any church body you've ever served on. So, remember that the vestry is a spiritual body and spiritual role models, and you are whether you want to be or not. So, when you're about ready to launch into some attack on someone, once again, I'm sure that's never happened to any of you, you need to sometimes, one of the best things we can do in vestries is stop before we speak. And think, what if Jesus was sitting next to me? Oh, Jesus is. So how do we nurture a vestry spirituality? Well, the baptismal covenant calls us to seek and serve Christ in all persons. How could this be modeled in a vestry meeting?
Respect for other opinions.
Respect for other opinions?
We don't do it in regular meetings, but like our retreat, after a business issue, we would stop for a little bit and just have a theological reflection on kind of the topic that it goes to. So we're doing business, and how does that flow into the theology of what we're trying to put forth as far as the body goes?
Why does this matter? Why is it doing that? Other things that we could do to model the baptismal covenant in our vestry meetings. We're actually in the general period. The question is then for vestry members is how do you shift from Robert's Rules of Order to discernment as a way of making decisions? You need Robert's Rules of Order, and you do, or something like that, in order to just keep the business going. You've got responsibilities as vestry members. But I think all too often we don't really engage in discernment, and sometimes we don't feel like there's time. But how many of your vestry members begin with prayer? Not all of them. Interesting. No judgment. I mean, sometimes I think we get I've got to get this done. How many begin with Bible study? Or reflection.
About a year ago, we began to separate our meeting beginning with a circle and a Bible reading. We used God's Grace and Robert's Rules for a book to read prior to coming, so that we actually came in as a group and let the day go and centered ourselves in a more spiritual moment. And then we actually physically moved then to our work table. And that seems to have made a big impact on us as we then begin to do the work.
Did you all hear that? Okay, that's a great way to do it, is to walk in. You've got this sort of sacred space allocated for letting go of what happened before you. You know, giving grace to the day that was and space for the time that is about to happen. You do that, and then you move into the business at hand. Another thing that I think is tremendously helpful, and we've been instituting it on our search committees, so for those of you who worked with me in transition ministry, is to have a chaplain. Is to have a chaplain from among your members. And that person's role is to pray like his or her life. It's just it's helpful. It's knowing that you might have Bible study, you might have a prayer, however you enter into the space of about ready to do the business, but also knowing that if at a certain point things get heated, you can have the chaplain pray. Let's allow the chaplain to pray before, or you've got a decision to make that's difficult. To say, let's let our chaplain pray for us, or however you want to do that. But I want to encourage you that this could be a really great thing to do. Once again, to have a chaplain in your meetings. So, I think part of the spirituality of vestries now is the development of norms. So I've asked you, how do you begin your meetings? It's so important that you do allow for God, however you choose to do it, be it, such as, it sounds like it's going on at Good Sam's, prayer, Bible study, not just, real quick, boom, but really to just, it's a couple minutes well spent. Take a little longer with the beginning than you maybe you have. To talk about your decision making, how does a vestry make its decisions? Generally, routine decisions are made by majority, the minutes. Really, it's like, well, I don't know if you really said that. No, it doesn't need to be. Let's just dispense with the easy things quickly by majority, that's fine. Some vestries choose to use a consensus model of decision making. Are you familiar with that? Do you know what I mean when I say consensus? Rather than majority, especially when it comes to certain types of decisions, such as the calling of a new record. Or a particularly difficult decision. And consensus, once again, is not, consensus is everybody saying, even if this would not be my first choice, I can live with it and I'm going to support the decision of the vestry. That is consensus. One of the things that I think kills the spirit in vestry meetings is that you don't adhere to a time frame. Folks, any meeting that lasts more than 2 hours, it's better to have another meeting. And if you absolutely can't, you can't. I mean, once again, this is not like the 10 Commandments. But just anybody who has sat in minutes or meetings of any kind, any meeting that lasts more than 2 hours is probably not going to be very productive. Respect each other's time and energy. We can just power through another hour. A lot of the times the decisions that are made are not good, and people are tired and resentful. In terms of behavior, this is one of the great spirit killers, parking lot conversations. You know what I mean by that? Yeah. I remember, I won't say where, I was in a church, and a decision had been made in the vestry meeting, and there was a window next to that meeting room where the parking lot was, and you could see people congregating in the parking lot immediately after. It's one thing to say, do you want to get together, let's, what's our bridge game? Who knows what people were talking about. But that too often what happens, if we engage and say that kind of behavior is appropriate, is that things get said that should have been said in the meeting. People are not speaking the truth to each other in love. And that, I can't believe she said that. I can't believe you did that. And it starts building up an us-them dynamic, and it's going to kill the spirit. And you're going to start seeing fractions developing or factions developing in the vestry. So, even if you're inclined, even if you really watch that parking lot conversation, don't.
I just want to say it also adds to, it hurts the congregation. When that gets out, somebody says something, and the congregation hears this, and we, like I said, we're supposed to be the leaders, and they say, well, I heard he said it, she told him. It's not a good thing.
Because you're absolutely right, that's another thing. Those conversations tend to bleed into the congregation. I guess it'd be one thing, Carol and I just were talking about Fran. But if we left it at that, Not that it's okay, but often, you know, then I'll go down to Mark, you know, these things just have a way of taking on a life of their own, and it's highly destructive. And it kills the soul.
But I think also the topic of the conversation you can take into consideration. I mean, the vestry agrees to do something like repave the parking lot, and 2 or 3 people are talking about how it's going to happen. I mean, I think the context needs to be taken into consideration too, doesn't it?
Absolutely, but I think you know exactly what I'm
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about. It's not usually we're gonna go into the parking lot because we wanna see how the striping's gonna work. And it doesn't matter if it's in the parking lot, I mean, that's the analogy. It could be, let's go have coffee.
Wait.
You know, or however it happens. In other words, allow the business of the meeting to stay in the meeting. And if you have more to say, schedule another meeting. Say it to everyone. The corollary to that is triangulation. So avoid it.
I think one of the difficult things we face in a vestry is going back to consensus. How do we instill in our members that we want to hear your opinion, we want to hear what you think, we're going to have our discussion, we're going to come to the point where we vote on a particular issue, and understand that if the vestry decides by majority vote that this is the direction we're going to go, you may not agree with that, that wasn't the way you wanted to go, but now it becomes important for you to accept that direction and support that direction. So instilling in our members that there's going to be times when the way you see things is the way things are going to go, and there's other times when it will go a different direction. But we all, once the vote is made, once the decision is made, we are now a united body in supporting that decision out to the vestry. How do we make that happen? I guess it's the-
You know, to the extent I can make any of that happen, I would love to. I think what happens, or what doesn't happen, sometimes is a really good vestry orientation. Once people are elected and you have a new vestry or bishops committee every year. And there's lots of different ways for doing those orientations, but I think part of it should be, this is how we're going to do business together. And so at least you set out what the norms are. It doesn't always mean that they're going to be followed. But I mean, if the expectations are, this is what it means, these are the different types of decisions we're going to make, this is the support we need. And if somebody absolutely cannot support the decision of vestry, he or she may want to resign. I'm not saying, once again, that that's optimal, but I mean, it's like, I just can't go there. Well then, I think we're just like, we try to hold on to people so tightly that we can't. Once again, I know it's harder in smaller churches. Actually, it's hard enough in big churches. I've worked in larger churches most of my time, and it's not always easy to get vestry members. But I think the vestry orientation should generally, this is how we are together as a body.
That orientation though is, I think, often not done right or well. And I've experienced over my times on vestry where it's been done exceptionally well, where we would go somewhere as a vestry and have the whole day or maybe a day and a half planned, where we had workshops set up, we had guest speakers coming in. We're going to break into little working groups and then report back to the main body. And we have those educational processes coming not just from people of the that are already on the vestry or of the congregation outside the diocese, having someone like yourself come and present. But that, to me, that is a very, very effective way of doing business in establishing a good learning environment for the vestry members. Vice, our orientation is, we're going to meet at so-and-so's house and have donuts. All that ends up with is a little fellowship get together and have a good chat and move on and have accomplished nothing.
Yeah, it's interesting because some people think, well, we really don't have time to do that. I would argue really take time not to do it. And for instance, if you want me to come out to your parish, I'd be happy to do that.
There's
So,
another element to that too.
and that is, with the help of the leadership, developing a certain culture within the vestry that subscribes to just exactly what you're talking about. So if someone steps outside that culture, they get a lot of, well, they don't step outside the culture as often. The whole vestry acts that way, and you see somebody else who disagrees with the decision that's being made, and now they move on. So I think that once you establish that culture, if you hang on to it, it helps a lot with that problem we're talking about.
Alison, can I ask a process question? The woman down at the end of the table who said that they have a circle and then they go to the table. Do you find that some people just skip the circle and come to the
Oh,
meeting?
no. What we
And how do you
have,
avoid that?
I don't know, because I haven't even had to think about that. We crave, I think we crave so much to have the opportunity to do that. It just really, I'm not going to tell you that it wasn't just a tad awkward initially, because here we were sitting in a circle and we hadn't done that before. We'd always opened with prayer. But no, as a matter of fact, I think to a person, we were very happy to have that opportunity.
I think it's great.
So I can't answer for you, I'm sorry.
I think it allowed us to be centered,
Yeah.
and we knew that if we weren't, that we were still totally distracted by things going on outside. And now this was the moment to come together to let that fall away, and to say, as one body, we now work to make things better for our congregation.
And along with that, there's a culture of being on time to the vestry meeting and starting the vestry meeting on time. So that is
Respecting each
already
other's
established, so
boundaries.
and that's how we start.
And that's why I like going to meetings at good stands. It's true, I mean, actually, most experiences, but it's like there is profound respect for the time that people are giving. Triangulation. That's where I'm going to talk about. Patty with Scott. And God forbid I talk to Patty. You know, about whatever issue I might have. I'll talk to someone else. And this is a huge problem. Period. This is a huge problem in church world. Where we'll talk about we'll talk about somebody to everyone else but the person involved, and nothing ever gets resolved.
So isn't that really all about conflict avoidance, and how do you, as leaders, create a culture that says Bishop Mary talked about emotional conflict and learning conflict, was it?
Tension. Yeah,
So
emotional tension, creative tension.
Yeah, so.
Well, in fact, I paid Mark to bring this up, because that's the next thing. Thank you. Conflict. I'll do it next time.
Not enough.
That dollar is just going to go so far. Conflict, couldn't we spend all day on conflict in any setting?
Conflict takes two people, and if you can stop it in that text right there, then the conflict is stopped.
Well, let me just go through what I've got here, okay, then I'm sure there'll be questions. Conflict, this is part of developing your vestry culture, is that you don't avoid it. Number one, don't avoid it. Don't pretend it's not there, because the meeting's going to go too long, if you bring it up. There's any number of, I don't want to hurt someone's feelings, but conflict doesn't go away by itself. Real conflict. Number one, don't avoid it. That's part of your vestry norms. If you are about ready to engage in a conversation or on a topic that engenders conflict, whether you have a chaplain or not, that is the time you stop and pray. A lot of times people just go barreling into whatever the topic is, and what really the best thing you can do is just have that gap for the Spirit to come in. Let's have a prayer. Let's have a moment of silence. Let's stop before we start opening our mouths. Don't ignore prayer. Very important. Use I language. Well, you know, everyone feels that. So-and-so felt that. I can't claim who. Crazy. I am upset about this. I am unhappy about this. Such and such happened and I got mad. Don't even use the it got mad. I got mad. We really do have to be mature members of Christ in this and own our part. I. So use I language and avoid, the last one is avoid labeling.
I'm sorry.
Avoid labeling. And you know, this is extreme. What a bad Christian. But, you know, depending on what the topic is, it could be, oh, she's just really conservative. She's stubborn. He never listens. You know what I'm saying? It's like, avoid labeling. And those are four really important ways of dealing with conflict. Others that you can, that.
I think it's important for us, someone mentioned earlier about having coffee and a bit of a fellowship social life. To a certain degree, I think it's important for us to establish those bonds of friendship and community very early on, and that allows for that difference of opinion and that conflict to exist while still promoting the community. And okay, it's a conflict, it's a difference of opinion. It doesn't mean we're not all out for the good of, say, whoever.
This is one tool, and it can be used during a vestry orientation, but it was used in a slightly different setting. Many years ago, I was part of what was called the Holiness and Relationship Task Force. And that's when we were looking at whether or not the Diocese of San Diego was going to start engaging in the blessing of same-sex, well, blessing of same-sex relationships. Marriage wasn't an option then. And for those of you who are around, those of us who are around, that was a very divisive issue in our diocese. And so the bishop called together a very theologically diverse group of people. He called together, you know, the lefties, speaking of don't label me. But, you know, I've been a big proponent of blessing same-sex unions, and so there was a couple of us who were very much in favor. There were several who were very much not in favor. We actually had gay and lesbian people on the committee, which we've never done before. And so there was about 12 of us. And we worked together very hard for a year, ironing out the policy that eventually came out by consensus. We started our first meeting by all of us telling our spiritual autobiographies. That was the work of our first meeting. And that was the brilliance of the facilitators, Suzanne Foucault and Robert Nagy. They were co-facilitators of that group. And it took all day. And by the time the last person finally told his or her story, I don't remember who it was, we're all like. But what that allowed us to do was to know each other in a way that we had never gotten to know each other before, and allowed us to have conversations, because people that I might have labeled before, all of a sudden maybe somebody got his story and his journey and how it was like mine. And so we had some very difficult discussions over the course of that year, and we came together, I think, with a beautiful piece of work as a result of that. So It's really important that we do allow for that opportunity to tell our stories and to get to know each other, because it's amazing what can be accomplished when you, and it's so sacred.
I was gonna say, another idea was Father Mark, one of the first conversations he had with potential vestry members was explaining the ground rules of conversations in that space, to make sure that people understood that they could say their opinions and it would be a safe place, that they would not be shamed, they would not be ridiculed, you know. And so just saying that before we even had our first conversation, you know, I think that was really helpful.
It's important to set your norms.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say back to your spiritual autobiography, we just did our retreat over at St. Paul's, and that was really good because I'm new to the vestry, and we had like 16 people, you know, you kind of know them, but you don't really know them, and so it kind of helped gel us together so that we go, oh, this is this person, and oh, this is what maybe some things that they talked about you never even knew. So it is sacred, but it kind of gave you like a sense of togetherness, and that you kind of have a common goal at the end.
It's not just a name, it's a person.
Right.
And it's a child of God.
Right.
Going back to the orientation again, goes to this topic and how we work conflict. During orientation, have a class, a time when we talk about listening. We mentioned that when you started out, that we don't listen well to each other. The problem is we can say it's important, one of the rules we have in any discussion is let someone speak, listen to what they have to say before you say it. That's not enough. It's how you listen that's important. Effective listening is what's important. That's a skill. And having a class on that and understanding how to do that, I think is vital to help us do it effectively.
See, and David's the other person that I paid. So good. Because I was going to talk about listening next. 20 minutes we have left. Listen carefully. I think one of the key tools for helping vestry members, any meeting, but vestry meetings, is to really look at listening as a spiritual practice. And I think we don't tend to look at listening in quite that way. Paul Tillich, the great theologian, says the first duty of love is to listen. So adopting a posture of listening is not just a spiritual practice, but it's a way of life. Now, if you ever want me to do my listening workshop, let me know. My favorites. And the nice thing is I don't get, this is part of my job, so it's not like I'm going to be making money on this. But there is, are you all familiar with TED Talks?
Yeah.
Okay. There is an excellent TED Talk by a man named, this is such a great name, Julian Treasure. And it's on listening. I think he calls it 5 tools of listening. But he's got like 2 or 3 TED Talks on listening. All of them are good. And Julian Treasure is who knew, but he's a sound expert in that, say, restaurants or businesses will hire him to determine the appropriate level of noise that should take place within a certain corporate environment. It's usually corporate in this case. Have you noticed that restaurants seem to be getting louder and louder?
Oh, yeah.
I know part of it is, I'm sure it's because I'm getting older and older. But they have found in studies done that if restaurants are noisy, people won't stay as long. So there's faster turnover. They make more money. You know, in the old days, what I remember as a kid is, if I went out to dinner with my parents, maybe they'd linger over coffee, and so we could be there a long time. And they're not making any money, when we're sitting there over coffee. So this is part of what they found. So makes, I don't know if Julian does that, but I mean, that's sort of what people in his line of work do, is they look at different businesses and what's an appropriate level of noise. So Julian in his TED Talk says, we are losing our listening. We are losing our listening. We spend about 60% of our time listening and retain at best 25% of what we hear. And he says, why are we losing our listening? One, the world is noisy, so it makes it hard to listen. We're in these restaurants and I'm like, what? You know, so there's that going on. We've gotten impatient. We expect sound bites. We're desensitized. We're sort of bombarded. And this is an interesting one, which I hadn't thought of. We've invented ways to record sound. So if I'm not listening now, in fact, if you're not listening to me now, you can go on the web later and listen to me again. So we don't necessarily take in what's going on at the time it's happening, thinking that we can listen to it, I'll listen to a tape, or I'll do something later. So we don't actually focus in at the moment it's happening. So there's times, of course, when listening and communicating really is a matter of life and death. You know, watch out, fire, car. But most of the time, I don't think we really pay attention to how essential listening is. There's a psychotherapist, Gloria Sterling. She attends the cathedral, and she wrote a little book called A Primer to Change Your Life Forever. And it's on listening. And Gloria writes, the fundamental to the process of authentic listening is understanding how listening occurs within a person. So our ways of listening are as individualistic as we are, which sometimes make listening to each other difficult. I listen in one way, you might listen in another, someone else might listen in a different way entirely. So she says, when listening, it's imperative to honor your own understanding and perception while respecting that of others. Once again, honor your own understanding and perception while respecting that of others. All too often we make assumptions about where someone is coming from, about the context of what they're saying, what they mean. We don't ask questions. We're not really listening because I assume I don't want to hear what he's going to say. I assume that's what she means, and I can be completely on base. That's really my thing.
I think we all assume that everyone has heard it the way we've heard it.
Yeah, and what's that old kid's game? Telephone? You know, and it's like, you know, I'll say something to a friend, and you know, by the time it gets to me, God knows, you know, what it's going to be. So we do make a lot of assumptions. Often when we find someone annoying, we stop listening. And you probably all heard this. A lot of times what we find annoying in someone else is what we find annoying in ourselves. So it's a way of like, I don't want to let that learn me. So when you find someone annoying, or you find someone hard to listen to, that really, I think, is a cue from the Holy Spirit to say, what's going on here? Rather than write him off, him or her off, is to say, what is God saying to me right now? It may be they're just annoying. But it may be that's touching something in me. He or she is saying something I don't want to hear, I don't agree with, and so I shut them down. And rather than use that as a moment for spiritual exploration or spiritual curiosity, what I would really call it, is to do that.
May I say that when you listen to another person, you are working into seeking and serving Christ in that person. Christ is revealing himself in what they are saying. So if you are actively seeking Christ in that person, you will actively listen.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully.
I mean, like everything else, there's the perfect model and then what we really do, at least in my case.
That's right.
The other thing too, though, is if we really allow ourselves to take that cue from the Holy Spirit and say, what's really going on here? I think a lot of times we end up finding compassion for that person. We may not agree with him or her afterwards, but it helps us develop a sense of compassion. And that's part of what happens in any meeting, but in vestry meetings in particular, because sometimes they're long, they're boring, they're heated, they're this, they're that, is that we lose our compassion for each other. Which once again is why it's so important to actually spend the time to get to know each other, whatever format you do, before you begin the business of the work. There's what's called the intent-impact dynamic. And this is something that I think we get caught up a lot in, and it interferes with our listening, and I really see this in vestry meetings, is my intent is to do this. The impact on you is different, because you've heard something different than what I meant. And so when you're sort of aware, not when you're, but when you become aware that that might be a dynamic in play, it's really helpful to say, this is what I heard. Is that what you were meaning to say? Is that what you meant? It may be, but I mean, we don't check out these assumptions. And so we cannot assume that just because I think I made perfectly clear that what you all are hearing is what I mean. Likewise, is to check in the impact thing. Several years ago, my husband and I were on a cruise together, and long story short, everything worked out fine. He's very much alive. But we ended up at a hospital in Brazil. We got kicked off the ship, and we ended up in this hospital in Brazil because he needed to have some medical attention. And so it's interesting being in a third world hospital where everybody speaks Portuguese. And except us. And so this one nurse in particular would come into his room periodically, and she would say something to him in Portuguese. And we'd look at her and go. So she would slow down and say, it really happened. It was sort of interesting. Like, oh, that doesn't just happen in the United States. But to just be aware. We just need to check out. One of the things that happens is that we don't listen to ourselves, that we miss out a lot of what's going on inside of us. So if you're really bothered by something someone says, rather than say, this is bad, I think, once again, it's that cue for the Holy Spirit is, what is it about this that's hooking me? What's going on here? I think all too often in these conversations, and this is where vestry can get so deadly, is that we just respond, we react, and we're not really aware of what's going on inside of us, and what's hooking us, what's getting us mad, what's getting us upset, what's making us feel discontent, and then once again engage in that holy wonder, to engage in that holy curiosity. I think the other thing that often happens in vestry meetings and in any kind of heated conversation is that we don't listen to hear what the person is saying. We're listening so we know what to respond to. You could be like 3/4 into your sentence and I'm already. And at that point, once I start engaging in what I'm going to say back to you, I'm no longer listening. Right? I think that's the dynamic we see playing a lot. And so I think that's important to know. Finally, a few minutes we have left, Gloria sets a basic guideline to listening, and I admit I find this hard. She writes, approach every conversation with no need to be understood. Seek only to understand the other person.
Yeah.
Seek to understand the other person.
So it's really not all about you. No, I mean, seriously, because I think that's what we.
Well, I know it is about you.
No.
Exactly. You know, like I said, I'll just keep explaining, eventually hoping that person will understand, and I'm probably not understanding where he or she is coming from. And that's really maybe the more important thing we're called to do.
Allison, I also think that maybe we need to ourselves take onus and say, before we get into these meetings, is that you gotta cut all the distractions from yourself first, so that when you get into the meeting, you're fresh. Because I find myself doing that, so it's like, kind of debrief myself and say, okay, I'm here for the common good, because I'm here to do good service, and it's not just my decision and my agenda, it's everybody, so that we give the respect to everybody. Right. Instead of being distracted and doing all these things.
It's almost like you're talking about doing the pre-thing to what they do at Good Samaritan. It's
Right.
like, before I go into the circle, I'm going to calm myself, I'm going to have this moment of just like, breathe. Then go into the meeting. I think that's so important. Cut down the noise that's going on in our heads, especially if we've had stressful days. So this is the last story I will tell you, because we're almost done. But this is where I think I really learned firsthand about this value of being with somebody that I'm in disagreement with, and the importance of listening. When I was in the ordination process, or when I was in seminary, I had to go through what was called a unit of clinical pastoral education, CPE. And CPE is generally done in hospitals. Mine was done in an alternative setting. But there was a group of us, about 12 of us who were in my CPE unit, one other Episcopalian, a couple of Roman Catholics, was ecumenical. And the other person who was Episcopalian is now no longer a member of the Episcopal Church. So he and I were coming from very different places. And one time we had a day together. We were meeting about Bow Park, and for whatever reason, it was a break, and I climbed a tree. I was younger, and it was a big tree. And Rob, that was his name, he saw me and he got in the tree with me. And we probably spent about an hour talking to each other, and we talked about, it was just one of those grace moments. We talked about the things that we shared in common. We talked about the things that we held that we did not share in common, the differences we held. And as I came down from that tree later on, I was aware that while the differences between us remained, the distance between us had closed. And so when we allow ourselves these moments of holy listening, extraordinary things can happen. And I say extraordinary things can happen on the vestry. So thank you.